right. Hey, everybody. How is it going? It's been a few weeks, but I am here. And today we're going to shift it up. We've been kind of talking about all those, the missing passages, the 16 of them. And I want to pause that today just because I've been kind of thinking about something else. We will come back to those. But I wanted to talk about these passages that I've been looking at in the King James Version. And lately, two of them, technically it's like 4 passages, but the 3 are kind of one. And I don't mean that in a Trinitarian sense, although I do believe, listen, I'm not a oneness Pentecostal, okay? The Trinity is a thing, okay? The Trinity is a thing, okay? But yeah, so there's 3 verses, and it's really the same issue between the 3 of them, and this is one of those passages in the Sermon on the Mount. So before we really dive in here, I'm just going to take a quick look and make sure all my audio, video stuff is working. I am sounding good. I'm just going to ask everybody out there. How's it going, Mr. Kevin? Friendly neighborhood Jesus freak. Hope everything's going well with you. I see Pastor Jonathan Burris is in the house. Good to see you. I'm glad you're here. I think you might like some of this. Scott, how's it going? Mr. JD, hope things are going well. And Get Gnomed, you are the first one here, so you win bragging rights for being the first one on the live stream. So there you go. You can turn those in for a few bragging rights at any time. All right. Okay, so I am going to just make sure I have everything up and running properly here. I got a couple things to go on. I'm going to pull up a Bible verse. You know what? We can read it in here. I can try to read the Gothic type. So I'm going to switch over here. And as I'm doing that, why don't you guys go ahead and tell me where you're from? I see Lakeland, Florida. That's cool. You know what? You know what I think of when I hear Lakeland, Florida? I can't help but think of Todd Bentley. I know it's awful. I can't help but think of Todd Bentley. Okay, guys, I'm not on the Todd Bentley train. Don't worry. Okay, I know he's been pretty heretical. Some of the stuff he says, just wild. But we're not here to talk about Todd Bentley. Oh, fellow Canadian in the house. I'm sure I knew that, Scott. Do you have a Timmy's there in front of you? That would be very Canadian if you did. Enjoying a Timmy's in a textual conversation. New England. Oh, very good. Are your RRs keeping us in suspense? We're originally from. Oh, he's redacted it. He's retracted it. All right. North Carolina. Very good. I might be coming to the States sometime in September. So if things like that finalize, I'll let you know where and when I'm going to be there. Not that I'm a super YouTuber and everyone's going to flock over and see me, but hey, maybe if we're in the area, maybe we can grab a coffee or something. All right. Now, where am I going here? I don't know what it is. These live streams, I always have trouble getting them started. Once they get going, they rock. Yeah, there we go. All right, so what you're looking at on the screen right here, let me make that a little bigger. There we go. We'll take up the whole screen while we can. This is a page from the King James Version, the 1611 edition. So archive.org is like the place to get all of this stuff from, right? Most of it's free, and you can borrow it, right? There's a system for borrowing stuff, so you can get stuff that's copyrighted as well. So if you're only going to use it for research, this is a great place to be. Anyway, so this is a page from the King James Version, 1611, and we're looking at Matthew chapter 5. This is a part of the Sermon on the Mount. Now, I'm preaching through the Sermon on the Mount right now, so this is why it caught my attention. And part of what I do when I'm preparing sermons is I compare a bunch of translations together just to see what's going on, and then I look at the Greek if I'm doing New Testament stuff. And so this one caught my eye because there's a difference here in the King James Version than all the other versions. So the King James Version, I'll just read it here in 3 places. So it's, ye have heard that it was said by them of old time, thou shalt not kill, and whosoever shall kill, they be in danger of the judgment. Okay, the Gothic script. But that's the phrase there that we're asking about is, ye have heard that it was said by them of old time. Now we have the phrase repeated in verse 27. Ye have heard that it was said by them of old time, thou shalt not commit adultery. And it goes on to talk about lust, essentially. Actually, I'm preaching on that this week. It's going to be a very interesting week. And then we come down to verse 33. Again, ye have heard that it hath been said by them of old time, thou shalt not forswear thyself, but shalt perform unto. Okay. So again, that's the question. The question is when he says, ye have heard that it's been said by them of old time. Okay, that's what the King James Version says, or all of the new translate. I don't even need to go one by one on them because it's across the board. It's to them of old time. So are we talking about by them when he's talking about what's been preaching, right? Or what's being taught? Is it being taught by them or is it being taught to them? That's the question here. Now, at first we do need to talk about like it's important because it's the word of God, but how much does it impact our exegesis, whether it's by or for? Because if you take a look at these three segments where this phrase is being used, if you're kind of like straining at this one phrase, and of course we're doing that here, not because, right, I'm not preaching, I'm looking at this and we're kind of going through this together to see what it's supposed to say. But if you're preaching this, right, you're not going to focus on the by or the to. You're just not going to do that, because the point of these passages is, one, you've heard that said, thou shalt not commit adultery. The whole point of this passage here is talking about lust in the heart of a believer, right? You shouldn't even have lust, let alone, right? That's the whole point of this passage. And when you're preaching it, you're going to focus on that, right? You're going to encourage your congregation to bring any lust issues before the Lord and confess them and repent of them and be washed in the blood and encourage people to live a life free of lust, right? And it's the same thing with the other incidents of this. You have heard it been said, don't forswear to thyself, right? We don't want to strain at that when we are necessarily talking about that specific little phrase. Okay, so when it comes to the importance of exegesis, again, it is important, but to the overall point of these passages, it ain't going to make a huge difference whether it's to or by. Now, I know there's going to be some that say, well, it's a matter of preservation and inerrancy, and sure, we can go with that. But typically, when you're preaching on this, you're not preaching on preservation or inerrancy. Anyway, so that's just a little thing beforehand. Now, I had actually set out to, when I was looking at this, to, when I initially saw it, my thought was like, look, it looks like the King James Version is wrong. And I honestly thought that I was going to go down the path of taking a look at this and finding out that the King James Version here is wrong. But I don't necessarily think that's the case, but it's very complicated. This is a really complicated grammatical issue. We will tackle that bit by bit. But if you're looking for me to say, is this wrong or is this right? I'm probably not going to come down on either one of those. But I want to talk a little bit again about the importance of straining at a gnat and, let's see here. These are my notes. You guys don't need to see my notes. Straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. So, again, because this channel is typically focused at textual issues, right, we're going to take a really good look at this. But if your Christian walk is to really, really dive into this thing and just to focus on it to the point where it's just absolute ad nauseum, right, and you're missing the point of the passage, right, don't do that. You're straining out a gnat and you're swallowing a camel. And and it's really interesting. This is my justification for taking the position that it may not necessarily be the most important part of this passage, right? So if you go to Matthew 23, Jesus is talking to the Pharisees and the hypocrites, and he says, woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, and hypocrites, for you pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law. So I'm coming here, and I understand the New Testament is not the law, but the principle is the same. And it's this, is that if we come here and we avoid, right, we don't take serious the stuff about hating a brother, or the stuff about lusting, or the stuff about forswearing thyself, then we're neglecting the weightier matters. So again, like I said, we're going to talk about this for the next hour or so, but man, if you don't take the command seriously that this whole passage is talking about, you missed it. So the point of the passage, we'll move on to this one. So we should probably get a little bit of context for this first, because this is a translational issue. Now, I want to state that this isn't necessarily going to be a textual matter. Now, normally I talk about textual variants, And it's important to recognize that for the most part, this discussion about Matthew 5, 21, 27, and 33 aren't particularly textual variant issues. Now there is a question as to, I think it's verse 27, whether or not the second part of the passage is a textual variant, but I'm going to avoid that conversation for now because I really want to hone in on the translational issue here. So whether it's majority text or Nestle Aland or whatever, I'm not particularly going to touch on that specific issue, but it's why do we come up with this specific translation? So now with that really, really, really big introduction out of the way, let's take a quick look at the comments. Hello, Get Gnomed, the carpentry theologian. Marginal note or to them. Yes, the marginal note is going to play a very important role here in this discussion. Jesus Freak says, the Latin is audistis qui dictum est antiquis. And now I do not speak Latin. I hope that was good. Which seems to be ambiguous. Yes, and ambiguity is going to take another big part in this. For some KJVO preachers, every sermon is really about the KJV. Yeah, if that's the case, then they've missed it. All right. In 21, I had said by the people of old. Then in 27:33 said of old. Then 38 and 43 just said. Yes. The carpentry theologian, I personally go back to the manuscripts the KJV translators used for the verses we're discussing. That's just how I do exegesis. Yeah. So, we'll talk a little bit about that. We don't need to be making fun of KJVO, folks. I'm not one, but I definitely prefer the KJV. It's what I grew up with and what I've always memorized from. Yes. Pastor Jonathan Burris, this is translational, not a variant issue. Verse 27. Yes. It doesn't have the second part of that phrase, which was to them of old, or by them of old. That's not in the second part in the critical text. I think even in the majority text. Hey, Pastor Brad, how's it going? Friendly Neighborhood Jesus Freak says Scrivener reconstituted the Vorlage insofar as it existed in Greek, but sometimes it did not. So you'll also need a Clementine Vulgate. I don't think we need it. We don't need that for this specific question here, because it's really interesting. Now, I don't speak Latin, but I know a little bit of Latin grammar, and my understanding is that Latin grammar and Greek grammar in certain aspects are very similar. And you had mentioned in a comment previously that there was an ambiguity here, and it's the same ambiguity for the same thing. It's going to be that dative case for those who are Greek nerds. It's that dative case. That's the problem. It's the dative case. And we'll dive into that. Okay. So now I took a look at all of the, I don't want to say ancient, but like the older Middle English versions. Should I say Middle English? Man, that's an ambiguity in itself. But like the main English ones that have come out that are like pre-modern. So, William Tyndale, Matthew's Bible, Geneva, no particular order, the Bishop's Bible, which is really important because the Bishop's Bible is used as sort of a reference for the King James translation, Coverdale's Bible, Wycliffe's Bible, all of these translations, every single one of them, all of them, they do not have by them of old, they have to them of old, to them of old. And again, when you come over into all of the English Bibles that are like modern, all of them, with the exception of the King James Version, all say to them of old, to them of old. So what is going on here? Middle English would be Wycliffe. Yeah, I think I'll roll with that. So what is going on here? That is the question. So for those of you who haven't kind of figured it out, the question goes into the Greek. So what were the King James Version translators doing when they translated that as by those of old? Now, I'm coming with the assumption, that the King James translators are smart men. I think we would all agree with that. Now, they're not beyond error. Okay, I don't believe that. I don't believe that the King James Version is necessarily perfect in every single little bit. There's a possibility of error in there. But I'm going to come to this discussion with the preconceived notion or the presupposition that the translators are very smart men and they knew what they were doing. And this to me would seem like the kind of error that you wouldn't expect for a seasoned, right? If we're going to assume this is an error, that it would come from a seasoned translator, someone who's very smart, polyglot, So we'll come to the discussion from that frame of mind. Now, excuse me. Yeah, so when we take a look at this, we now know that by them of old time is in disagreement with every English Bible translation that is available today. Now, there might be some out there that have some obscure ones or some very not well-known ones that have by them of old, but I don't have them. I haven't seen them. I don't know what they are. So this stands, the KJV translators stand on their own in this passage. So let me pull up a Greek text here. Let's do Scriveners. You know what? Let me just pull it up here. Yeah, here we go. You guys can see that. Yeah, I get Logos is so complicated. You know what? Let me find a better way to do this. Just give me a second here. Yeah, we're going to take a look at 1 Timothy 6:20 in a bit. Here we go. Oh, perfect. That'll work. I don't particularly like to use Bible Gateway a whole lot, but I can zoom it in and out and make it nice and big because I know many of you are probably watching this on phones and you would benefit from a very big view of it. All right. Okay, so here's the verse in question. Everybody can see that. I'm just going to pull up my stuff here. Yeah, there we go. So here's the verse in question. So, ikusete hoti arethi tis arakeus u phonevsis hosta an phonevsia nokos stati krisi. So again, the one in question here is arethitis archeos. So it has been said to them or by them of old. Now you'll see here, this is what we call the dative case. So in Greek, a noun can be in one of 5 cases, right? If you count the vocative case. And this specific one is in the dative case. Now, when you are trying to express something that's happening to someone, right, or something that's happening to something, we call that the direct object, right? So in English, if I were to say something like, I hit the ball to my friend, right? I'm swinging, I hit the ball to my friend out in the field. To my friend, he's going to be he's going to be the direct object of the sentence, right? He's the one receiving the action of the verb. So in Greek, when we receive, when something's receiving the action of a verb, we are putting that in what's called the dative case. Okay, so in this instance, we are looking at, you've heard that it was said to them of old, okay, to the ancient ones or whatever, or in ancient times. It depends on how you want to translate that. But this is in the dative case. So again, the dative case means that it's the direct object of the verb to speak, right? This is past tense verb. It's said to them of old. Now, if that was the case, right? If it was really that simple, right? That's probably how we all learned the dative case, right? When we went to school, we learned you put the to in front of it, and then that's your dative case. You use the keyword, and you're good to go. But if it were that simple, we wouldn't be here talking about that, because then the King James version, the King James translators would have went to those of old, and then we wouldn't be talking about this today. But see, the thing is the dative case actually acts in a number of different ways. In fact, if you look at grammars before, I would say before the 1900s, I don't know when the shift happened, but there was talk of a 5-case or an 8-case system, and it was all, that's going to get too complicated. But all this to say is that dative case word, tis archeos, those of old, doesn't always act as the direct object. It doesn't always act as the direct object. It can act in another way. And so the other way that the dative case acts is by something called agency or means. Now, how? These are such big words, it's getting so nerdy. So agency or means often speaks about something with which something happens. So let me make this a little bit more concrete here. So we go back to my example of I hit the ball to my friend. Now we could ask the question, well, what did you hit the ball with? And I would say something like, I hit the ball with my bat, right? So because the bat is the thing being used to hit the ball, we would put that into the category of means, right? The bat was the means with which we hit the ball. So if we're using the bat in that way, we would use the dative case. Now, means is always used when it's something that's impersonal. It's a thing, right? Like a baseball bat or a golf club or I hear with these headphones, right? It's impersonal. But then we move into something called agency. We can have the dative of agency. And the dative of agency is essentially the same things as means, except it's something that happens through a person or a personal thing as opposed to a thing itself. So the dative of agency would be something like, well, it was spoken by me, right? Me would be agency. I'm the one who's doing the speaking and I speak it out. So this here, when we come to tous archeos, by those of old, right? When we use by there, we're actually referencing or we're translating this phrase as though it's the dative of agency as opposed to the direct object. So what we're seeing here is an ambiguity between whether or not we should translate this as a direct object to those of old, or whether we should translate this as a dative of agency by those of old. So this is the question here, and I know it's a bit complicated, but let's hear it. Is everybody following along so far? If you haven't had any Greek training, this might be a little bit, or if you haven't read any Greek or done any studies in Greek, it might be a little bit complicated. But I will again try to keep it simple so you can follow along. Let's see, what do we got here in the notes, or in the comments? All right. IRC, Stephanus worked on either the 16 or the Clementine. Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot here. You guys are talking up a storm. That's great. Howdy ho, neighbors. How's it going, Colin? The carpentry theologian. How's it going? What kind of Vulgate did the AV translators use? Did they use the Clementine, or am I getting my Latin Vulgate editions times mixed up? I'm not sure. I don't know much about Latin. Our Nobody's Beyond Air, that's right. Challoner has to them of old. Yeah. I think just about everybody's going to have to them of old. Smart but compromised. Pastor Brett, just read the Bible and trust the Lord to interpret the scripture for you. But we can't do that with the modern critical text. I think you can. Now, again, I have my misgivings with the modern critical text, but I'm not a King James Version onlyist either. Can you define what the modern critical text is? Sure, the modern critical text is going to be anything based off of the modern eclectic method pioneered by Westcott and Hort. And of course, that has gone through some stages of changes. And now we are currently in the CBGM stage. And so basically your Nestle Aland text is based off of this here. The SBL edition is based off it. The Tyndale House Greek New Testament, I don't know if I would claim that. It is only if you limit the decisions to pre-9th century manuscripts. I think that's what they were going for when they were putting that together. You would lump that in as a critical text because that's kind of what it is. And there's a couple other. Tischendorf has one, and a few others. So anything basically put together through the modern critical text method would be considered a critical text. That's generally juxtaposed with the Textus Receptus, which is the traditional text of the Reformation, right? It came out of the Reformation in the 1500s. And then, of course, there's Byzantine priority, which is where I would put myself. And that basically says that for the most part, I don't want to say the word majority because it's not always a majority, but for the most part, the vast bulk of manuscripts would contain the readings, especially in supermajorities and such. So yeah, it's kind of three positions, and then King James Version onlyism would be another position, but it doesn't care too much for the manuscripts. All right. Let's see. Can you define the 16 Clementine? So Moreno's just answering stuff. How's it going, Mr. Moreno? I don't like Bible Gateway either. I use the Bible Memory Pro app where I can memorize scripture categories, verses, and all, and of course read the text. Nice. Get Gnome, Jesus is Lord. He is. Amen. Where am I going here? You know what? I can go like this. There we go. I lost our place. Get to know Jesus. Modern. Oh, there we are. Modern critical text equals Nestle All and UBS. Yes. The Carpenter theologian. I am pro majority text, but I don't think we should disqualify the critical, mainly because no doctrine thereof is omitted. Yeah, it's one of those scenarios, right, where this would be worth a video. I think. I think it's an error to say that no doctrine is affected. I think it's an error to say that. But I also think we shouldn't blow it out of proportion either. Like I can't think of a cardinal doctrine in the critical text that would be so utterly destroyed that we couldn't know the truth from it. I just don't see that. I found one minor doctrine. I would consider it minor doctrine, like one not affecting salvation and the plan of faith and all that kind of stuff. I found one minor one, which I think is impacted. But again, these aren't necessarily earth-shattering. Now, again, if you're coming from a position of preservation and inerrancy, and you see that as a major doctrine, which I would agree it is, then the whole textual critical discussion, right, hinges on on that. However, with that being said, we'll move on. I don't think it affects doctrine, but I do believe it was produced by skeptics with an ulterior motive. Yeah, I'm not going to touch that one. All right. John 1:18 affects doctrine. Yes, it impacts doctrine, whether it's God or Son. Yes. Only begotten God versus only begotten Son. That it doesn't affect doctrine shows how well it's been preserved despite the best efforts of man. Oh, wow, there's a lot of comments. You guys are talking it all up. This is great. Jesus Freak, it certainly appears that way. Amen, Colin. Colin, yes. 1 John 5:7, Acts 8:37 affects doctrine. Again, 1 John 5:7, for example, right? We would say that it affects Trinitarian doctrine, but the issue is its effect is rather minor when you consider that there are other passages that speak about the Trinitarian God in like clear ways. Again, whether you think 1 John 5:7 is scripture or whether you don't think it's scripture, you can still go to the scriptures and determine that there's a triune God, right? If you believe it's scripture, you might say, well, it weakens it because then we can't use this passage. And that's fair. Sure, it weakens it. But again, you would go to other passages. Now, Acts 8:37 is a bit different. I think we would have to have a little bit of a discussion. I'd have to look into that a little bit further. I know there's a question about believers' baptism and such there. But yeah, anyway, so let's move on. If you're referring to God the only begotten versus God the only begotten Son, I don't think that's a doctrinal issue, but I do believe it's a case of intentionally using weird source because it's weird. God has preserved his word. As far as Greek goes, it's Greek to me. There you go. For me, what's going on here? I know what's happening. Hey, Nick's in the chat. How's it going? Potentially. James, Tyndale is based on the first 500. Okay, first 500 years of evidence. Okay, thanks, Pastor Jonathan. I thought it was the first 900 years, but you're right. First 500 years of evidence. Acts 8:37 potential doctrine. I came out of Catholic, glad to get out of KJV as first source. Okay. Get owned. I love the King James Bible, God's preserved word. Good. Yeah, I love the King James Bible too. You don't have to be a King James onlyist to love the King James version. It's actually sitting on my nightstand. I read it every night. Potentially. Pastor Brad, it sounds like you are objecting to something that I just said, and I can't remember because that was probably a few minutes ago. All right. How do you respond to objections that Tyndale was burned at the stake because he was a heretic and changed the Bible? He will answer that if he feels necessary to. All right. The problem with equating the Bible with the KJV is first, it's Anglo-centric, and second, where was the Bible in 1603? Yes. It's not preserved word. Watching from Australia. Remove the confession of faith. You change the gospel. Remove the confession of faith. Okay. Really? I'd be curious to see how that works. If you remove the confession of faith, you change the gospel. I don't think you do. I don't think you do. Gignomed, true, but if something is repeated many times in the Bible, that means it's important. So I don't think we should remove verses just on that basis that they're found elsewhere in the Bible. No. So there's a lot of comments in here. If I read through them all, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get through this stuff here. But let me just interact with this one comment. So RR says, if something is repeated many times in the Bible, that means it's important. So I don't think we should remove verses just on that basis, on the basis that they're found elsewhere in the Bible. Yeah, and I would absolutely 100% agree with that, right? In fact, from a Byzantine priority position, I went through a couple where phrases are repeated, and in the critical text, they're removed. And of course, when they're repeated for an effect. They're repeated to put it in your mind more, to send a purpose. I think there's some exegetical value in there that's lost when we take those passages out. And being a Byzantine priority guy, I would say keep them in because they are part of the original text. Now, yeah, we shouldn't, though, be taking them out because we think that it's just repeated. And whether or not scribes did that, I don't know. That would be a good question to look into. All right, let's move on. So I saw this here. So let me pull this back up. So we're talking about this passage here. You have heard that it has been said to those of old, or by those of old, o phonevsis, hoston phonevsi, enokos este ti krisi. I can't remember what phonevsis is. I'd have to look it up in English. But yeah, it has been said to those of old, or by those of old. The question is now, where am I going here? Hang on, I lost my train of thought. Right, the question is, why did the King James Version translators use by those of old when everything else has to those of old? So I reached out to a friend of mine. I reached out to Tim Berg, and he's a King James Version historian, and he sent this back to me today, actually. So I asked him if there was any documentation that was provided in some of the recent finds involving the King James translators, or if there's any notes or annotations or anything like that. And he did refer to a document in Bode 1602. And I'm just going to read out what he said. I did get his permission to share this. So let me pull the notes up. And this was his response to my question about Bode 1602. I asked him about, the companies that translated this. So the King James Version was translated. There were a bunch of people grouped up into 6 companies, and the work was kind of divided up between them. And I wanted to know which companies translated Matthew and if they left any notes. So Tim's response was this. He says, let me just, I'll just change this here. There we go. So Tim said, the Second Oxford Company worked on the Gospels and Revelation and probably Acts. Several of the lists show that they subdivided so that 4 men primarily worked on the Gospels. George Abbott, later Archbishop of Canterbury. Richard Eads, was it replaced probably by John Agliombi? Giles Thompson and James Montague. Most lists only identify them by titles, namely Dean of Christ Church, Winchester, Worcester, Windsor. So there is some uncertainty about the identity. So we have 4 men who probably worked on Matthew. So the decision to put to or by those of old would have been made by 4 men initially. Okay, initially, this is a complicated process. Most lists... they did propose a revision to verse 21. So this is verse 21, because this is the first in a series of passages which say it was said by them of old, right? Because there's 3 others. To keep it consistent, they would have translated the 3 the same. So when we talk about the first, we're really just talking about all 3 instances of this. So they proposed a revision to verse 21. And he showed me an image below of Bode 1602, and it has some handwriting on there. Now, I'm not going to show it because I'm not sure if it's copyrighted or not. So I'm just going to leave that off the video for now. But it shows some handwriting with some text that reads, or by them of old. So initially in the King James Version, so if I come back here, initially in the King James Version, it said, when these 4 translators went by, it said, "Ye have heard that it was said to them of old." Now, this was what the 4 translators initially put down, to them of old. And in the footnote, they had a comment there that said, or by them. Now, you see here, if you're looking, you can see that there's a footnote. I wonder if I can zoom in a little further. Yeah, there we go. So you'll see the footnote that says, to them. Okay, so this is in the King James Version 1611 as it was finished. But what I'm saying is when the initial changes or when the initial translation was done, before it went to the finalizing committee, I'm just calling it finalizing committee. I'm sure there's a fancy name for it. Before it went to there, it was actually reversed. So what's here in the marginal note was actually in the main text, and what's in the main text was actually in the footnote. So it would have read, "Ye have heard that it was said to them of old," with "by them of old" being in the footnote. Okay, so what's going on here? So this proposal was rejected. Okay, it was rejected to do it that way. And we're uncertain who did the rejection. So it was either rejected by another company. Now, Tim seems to think that it was more likely rejected by the 12 final revisions in Stationers' Hall in 1609 to 10. In the end, the proposed text and margin were switched. The 1611 text read "by them" with a marginal note that briefly said "or to them." So there's a little bit, I don't know if confusion is necessarily the word here, but there is, we aren't even looking at that whole time. There we go. We weren't even looking at that the whole time. Okay, I'll just briefly explain that one more time, just really quickly here. So again, in the body of the text, as we see the final King James Version as it was finally translated, we have, "Ye have heard that it was said by them of old time," and then in the footnote here, "or to them." Now, what we're saying is originally when those 4 translators from the company, they had this switched. So their recommendation going into finalization was, well, we should have, "Ye have heard that it was said to them of old time," and then we should put in the footnotes or in the marginal notes, we should have "by them of old time." Now, at some point in the process, from the time that they finished the work on Matthew 5 to the time that it got finalized, somebody came along and said, "No, I think we should switch that." And that kind of is interesting because I'm sure whoever switched it, whoever suggested that we should switch it, and of course the guys in the end, I think 12 of them had to agree to whether or not this was good or not. They all knew, they would have all known that it was going against the grain of what every other English Bible translation would have said before. They had the Bishop's Bible in front of them. I'm sure they were aware of the Geneva. They were aware of Matthew's. They were aware of Coverdale's. They probably had Wycliffe's Bible there, and so on and so forth. So this was an intentional decision to change this from to them of old to by them of old. So this wasn't a mistake. This was definitely not a mistake on the part of the translators, at least not an intentional mistake. So what is happening here? What is happening here? We could just go and say, well, every other Bible translation has to them of old, and so every other Bible translator probably right. So we're going to use the majority here, and yeah, I know I'm not a majority text guy, so I'm not being inconsistent here. We could do that, but majorities aren't always right, as we know. So my next question is, well, why did they make the decision to change that? Why did they make the decision to change that? So I took a look at some grammars, and again, coming back to the grammar discussion. Before we do that, let's go into the comments. We'll give you some time to digest everything I just said. But first, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to zoom back up here and see where we are. Man, these comments are just coming in like crazy. This is great. True, but if something is repeated many times, we just talked about that. Referencing, but concerning the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was spoken to you by God, saying? What would you like me to reference there, Ross? I did like an extensive review of the way that verbs of speaking are used with the dative case. And it's inconclusive for a number of reasons, and we'll get into that. When I say Tyndale, I was referring to the Tyndale House Greek New Testament. That brother. Okay, gotcha. A little bit of banter. Perhaps by skeptics, my opinion, brother. And amen that Yahweh preserved his word. I do have my reservations of UBS, but I won't deny it can be used for the eclectic English translations, like the NKJV. The NKJV wouldn't be an eclectic English translation. No, that's based off the Texas Receptus. Excuse me. Little Season was recently pushed big time based on KJV. I'm not sure what that is. Friendly Neighborhood Jesus Freak says 1 Timothy 3:16 isn't actually doctrinal because if you look at the alternate reading, he, the antecedent, is God. So nothing is actually changed. I would see. I did a video on this. It's worth going back into the into the video history. I think it was one of the first live streams I did actually. It was fun. But I think it doesn't change doctrine. But again, I think it does weaken the Trinitarian doctrine a little bit. All right. Get Gnome, Friendly Neighborhood Jesus Freak. Yes, that's what I said about 3:16. If the reading God in 1 Timothy 3:16, I could handle he being the original reading also. So it ambiguously means God, even if the word God isn't there. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. It doesn't unambiguously mean God if the word God is not there. No, if you put he there, it's not ambiguous. Just by definition, it's not ambiguous. Or sorry, by definition, it's ambiguous. Why does doctrine have to be utterly destroyed in order for it to be a problem? Isn't obscuring, confusing, and distorting the word enough of a problem? Excuse me. Yes. Matthew 5:20 makes clear that those who are speaking were the Pharisees. So verse 21 says what they were speaking, adding their interpretation to the law of God. This was spoken by them, not to them. Right. So there's a contextual component to why I think the KJV translators went this way. Now, I'm being very purposeful here saying why I think the KJV translators went this way, because I'm trying not to necessarily make a hard determination, because I don't think I can make a hard determination. I can say this is what the KJV translators did and this is why I think they did it, but they certainly didn't do it haphazardly. So anyway, if the reading God is false, we're continuing with the comments here. Pastor Jonathan says, I have a video on Tyndale, including his arrest and execution. Tyndale's execution was about much more than just his actual translation. Yes. He was a rabble-rouser. No. The problem is that for many people, the question isn't generally the text, the dual inspirationism, which brings up the problem. Why did God need to inspire the Bible? Where was the Bible in 1603? Yes. Pastor Jonathan Burris will watch it later. Thank you. Does the reading with the strongest doctrinal reading have to be the original one? If we find a new manuscript, the more blatantly affirmed say the personhood of the Spirit, must we adopt it? Mr. Morano, I think he's got it right on the spot here. Just because it has a very clear reference to some sort of aspect of God does not necessarily mean in and of itself that it's scripture over another passage. A lot of other ways to make those determinations, but just, my favorite doctrine is not is not a good way of determining whether or not something is legit or not. I think in many places it's always made clear, belief, then repentance, then baptism. So losing Acts 8:37 is a problem, but not a major one, right? Not a major one. Neither Biz nor NA have it. Now, of course, if you see preservation and inspiration as major doctrines, you would probably see that as a major one because it impacts those doctrines. The carpentry theologian, most of the variants are spellings, especially in the New Testament. The percentage of variants overall is half a page, according to John Barnett. I don't know who John Barnett is, but I would disagree with that. You take the long ending of Mark 69-20, which I believe is original, by the way, and the story of woman caught in adultery. I think we've got more than half a page there. And then there's a number of other 16 other verses, right, are contested between the TR and the critical text. No, I don't agree with that. So 837 is in 15% of manuscripts in some church fathers. Randy Vaughn, how's it going, Randy? RV, it would be interesting to see how many times the dative form would not be the indirect object, but the agency. I can't even imagine how that you could do a Greek search on that. So I did that. So I did a search on agency of the dative and realized that it really doesn't matter in the sense that we're looking at a specific verb. So this is the thing. You can't take an equation and then apply it to language. It doesn't work that way. You can't just say every time there's going to be a direct object, it's always going to be done in this way. It can mostly be done. In fact, it could be 95%, but there's always that exception to the rule. And languages, like you look at the English language, English, and I know English isn't Greek, but just because we all know what English is, we're all speaking it, right? If you're listening to me, you're either listening to me through an interpreter or you're understanding it in your mother tongue. So you can't try applying a rule to English, right? I before E except after C, or as an A like neighbor and way. It turns out that the word science, for example, does not go by that rule. And that's just one example. There's lots of them. Like take some of the ways that word sounds. Like you take the word live. I live, right? But then if you use it as an adverb, for some reason we lengthen the I. We're going like I'm live, right? I'm live on YouTube. Yeah, these rules are more like guidelines. Not to say that there's some things that can't, but yeah, language just doesn't work in a way where everything is just formulaic. So when we talk about that kind of, I think maybe we'll use that to springboard into the next part of the discussion here. Now I'm gonna try this. So I'm gonna see if I can get logos. I saved a layout because I did a search on the dative case, and specifically I did a search on the dative case attached to verbs of speaking. So verbs of speaking in the New Testament, right? Lego, I say, I speak. Ipon, which is I said, or he said. Ipon, krithisen ipen avto ipen. Ipen is he said. Ipon is I said. In the past tense. And then whether it's active or passive, these are all Greek words. But I did a very specific search on all the words of to speak that were aorist, so kind of like a past tense, passive, and I think that's all I did. And there weren't very many in the New Testament. And of those that were in the New Testament, a couple of them didn't even have a direct object or anything like that. Let's see if I can find it here. We'll see if I can get the layout up and running. To speak, there it is. Oh, goody. It's here. Let's see. It might look like a jumbled mess, and the reason is because I do all my work on my computer upstairs, which has a very big ultra-wide monitor, 21:9. I will never go back. And soon I am going to see if I can get one for my studio here, because it's just so much better. But yeah, so let me grab my notes here. See, if I just kind of take my time and read my notes, I don't look foolish when I get something wrong. Because if it's wrong, it's because it's in the notes and it's wrong. All right, let me find that real quick. Where did it go? Sorry, just a second. My notes disappeared on me. There it is. There we go. Okay. So we are trying to answer the question, what is going on here? Oh, I'll take the search out. Did I just... Oh, no. Man, I am so frustrated with some of this Bible software. And why are you up there? There we go. Now I'm going to have to open that again. Hang on. I did it again. Okay. You know what I think it's doing? Oh, I didn't realize. Okay, so that's what it's doing. If there's any Logos guys in here, what this is doing here is when I open a new layout, it closes all my notes. I don't like that. Okay, so now I got to go like this. There we go. Okay, all right. I think I'm good. Okay, so the verb in question is right here, erethi. And if we just mouse over, it tells us all of the things we need to know. So this is an aorist passive indicative. So I looked for all of the aorist passive indicative verbs of Lego. And this is what I pulled up here. Now, there we go. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times. It occurs 10 times in the New Testament. That's it. This form of the verb exists 10 times. And the reason why I'm restricting my search to this specific form of the verb is because oftentimes what will happen is a noun that comes after a verb will oftentimes have a certain shift in its grammatical structure or a slight shift in its meaning, sort of, depending on how the words connected to it are said. So if I flip over and just use the specific form of the verb that we see in Matthew 21, 27, and 31, we can get an idea of whether or not the dative case is always used as a direct object. So verses 5, 21, 27, and 31, okay, as you can see, are we looking? We're not even looking at that. There we go. All right, there we go. I'm sorry, it's going to be small. I don't know how to make it bigger. That's why I usually use other things for Bible verses. But again, there's 10 ways in which the verb to speak is used in the same manner as verse 5, 21, 27, 31. Okay, so that's 10 minus those 3, that's 7. So there's 7 other places this verb occurs in that form. So in these examples, we have what I'll call the naked dative. Okay, so there's other ways to express agency in Greek other than a dative case. And in fact, the normal way to express agency in Greek is to use prepositions. Dia. We see dia being used when it says something like, it was said by the prophets that blah, 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 right? By the prophets. It's using dia. Tis prophetes, right? It's using the preposition. But you can also express agency without the preposition. It's just rare. It's rare. According to Dan Wallace, it's rare. And Dan Wallace is the Greek grammarian guy. I took a look at my grammars there, and he says it's rare, but it's possible. And we'll talk a little bit about that because he lays out a couple guidelines for trying to determine whether or not we're using agency here. But you can see here, Matthew 5:33, again, you have heard that it was said to those of old. This is the New King James Version. Hath been said by them of old. Matthew 5:38, you have heard that it was said. And again, there's no direct object. There's nothing. It's just the verb. Matthew 5:33, you have heard that it was said. So almost half of the uses of this verb in this form are from Matthew with this very phrase. So the first half, we can't use them to determine because those are the ones we're trying to determine, and the two of them don't have any direct objects or anything. So we can't use those two. So now the other 5 are here. So we have erethiafti, it was said to her, it was said unto her. The King James Version goes with to her here. Romans 9:26, again with the dative, with the naked dative, right? No prepositions. Erethiaftis is said, and it shall come to pass in the place where it was said to them in the New King James Version, in the place where it was said unto them in the King James Version. So again, they're translating the naked dative as to instead of by, right? Now, where it gets interesting, we come to Revelation 6:11, and it says, then a white robe was given to each of them, and it was said to them, Revelation 6:11, New King James Version, and it was said unto them, same one, okay, maybe it was the other one. And then Revelation 9:4, the last one, and it was said to her, or to her, none at all. Look at that. It's just those 3 passages. Interesting. Hina mi adikeososinton. So they were commanded not to harm the grass, and it was commanded them that they should not harm the grass. So So that's interesting. I don't know why I missed that. I thought there was one in there where they had agency, but there is no agency used. There's no agency used at all. None. Other than those three passages. So again, if the King James Version translators are consistently translating that as to, right, the naked dative by itself, no prepositions, translating it as to in every other passage except for these three, what is going on here? What is going on here? They're obviously smart men. They know what they're doing. They purposely made a decision. This is where we're at so far. They purposely made the decision to reject the reading to them and put to them in the footnote and put by them in the text. So now I took a look at Wallace's grammar, and this is where it gets interesting. Let me get my notes here. Yeah. So in Wallace's grammar, he gives us four kind of ways that we can use to determine whether a specific dative case noun is a dative of agency. So the first one he has is the lexical test. Okay. So is it a noun that references something that's personal? Is it a personal noun? And the answer to this, when we talk about Matthew 5, 21, 27, 31, is yes, right? It is personal. So to those who are of old, we're talking about people. So we passed the first lexical test. The second one that Dan Wallace gives us is a contextual question. And he says the person must be portrayed as exercising volition. Okay, and what do we mean? That's a lot of fancy word. So the way I read this is are these people able to make a decision to do something? Okay, that's how I would reference that. Are these people being portrayed as being able to have volition, to make a decision to do something? And they're personal. We're talking about individuals, whether they're teaching, that they would have volition to teach a specific thing, or whether they would even have a volition to obey a certain teaching. So I would say here that this passes the second test, the contextual test. The third one that Wallace gives in his grammar is if it is grammatical. And this is where we kind of run into a little bit of a road bump here. According to Wallace's grammar, he says, the only clear texts involve perfect passive verbs as in the classical idiom. So we get two things from this. One is that where we see a dative of agency used, and it's clear that it's a dative of agency, he says that all the clear ones are perfect tense verbs. And he also states that they are a classical idiom. So the dative of agency is something more often seen in classic Greek as opposed to Koine Greek. So this one doesn't really seem to fit because this is an aorist verb. It is not a perfect verb. So what is going on here? Okay, we're going to hold that one. We're going to pause that one, and we're going to move on to the fourth one. The fourth one that Wallace gives us is a linguistic. That is, the agent of a passive verb, this is a passive verb, can become the subject of an active verb. So the passive verb or active verb. So this is passive. It has been said. Verse, if we make it active, it would be someone said. So can we take the direct object, in this case, to those of old, and could we make it an active verb and say, those of old said? Yes, we can do that. So of the 4 out of the 3 criteria the 3 out of the 4 criteria that Wallace gives us to determine if this is a dative of agency, 3 of them pass, all right, and the fourth one doesn't, or the third one doesn't, right? The only clear text involves a perfect passive verb. Now, if the King James translators were able to go forward in time and look at Wallace's stuff here, this is how I think they would respond. Because remember, again, they made a purposeful choice to remove 2 and relegate it to the marginal notes. So I think they would say something along the lines of this. And again, I know I'm just extrapolating from what I've seen so far. I think they would say something like this. They would say, 1, Wallace is only talking about clear texts. In this example, he's only talking about those that are clearly perfect passive verbs. So because it's not a perfect passive verb, it doesn't mean that it's not a dative of agency. It just means that it's not as clear as one that would have been if it was attached to a perfect tense verb. And then in talking about the classical idiom, there are always references from an older form of the language into a newer form. We all have, most languages tend to hold on to certain features. So let me give you an example. If I say, like the way we use adjectives, I could say something like, I lived in London, Ontario, right? It's an offshoot of London, England. And London, England, there's the Thames River. And in London, Ontario, there's the Thames River. And we call it the Thames River, right? But on occasion, if we're having a document and it's very like formal and stuff, we might switch the adjective to the front instead of to the back. And it might be the River Thames instead of the Thames River. Okay, and that's a feature of older language kind of being attached onto this. So if we're talking about using the dative of agency as a classical idiom, we could suggest that maybe the King James Version translators see that as imposing itself a bit on the Koine language, and that could totally be. The other thing that is potentially possible, again, I'm just answering the question as to why I think the King James Version translators went this direction. The other thing that's possible is in certain instances, an aorist tense verb can act in such a way that gives a sort of perfect idea. I don't have any examples off the top of my head, but my understanding is this is something that can happen. Now, those are the 4 tests. So I would give this like a 3.5 because the grammatical argument, the only clear text involving a perfect passive verb as in the classical idiom, it doesn't necessarily speak to a certainty of something, more like a probability of something. And so there could be something in that off chance. Now, there is another part of the argument that I want to talk about, and I want to talk about the context of the passage. So before we get into that, let's come on over here and let's take a look at some of the comments. I just got to check and make sure the live stream is doing all right. We are doing all right. Awesome. Okay. All right. Comment time. Let's see how many comments we got going on here. We don't have the originals. No, we don't. Pastor Jonathan Beers, he retracted a message. Oh, here we are. I don't know how far down we went. I'm going to have to just pick a point and go. Get Gnome says, Dwayne Green, we got a big stream today. We do. This is good. This is encouraging. I'm glad everybody's coming in to say hello and talk and listen to me ramble on about the King James Bible. I think in many places it's always been made clear belief than repentance. Okay, I think we talked on that. I'm going to skip down just a little bit more. Oh, Ross, thank you very much. Very generous. Thank you. We don't have the originals. Nothing to compare. You're right. Yes, that's kind of the problem, right? Is we don't have the originals. And so that's a double-edged sword, not having the originals. Pastor Brett, just to clarify, are you a KJV onlyist? He's been back and forth. Friendly neighborhood Jesus speaking for Pastor Brett. It assumes there was later streamlining of the text by scribes. Hence the difficult is more authentic, but the very assumption has yet to be proven. Yes, Colin, that would be worth, I think, a video on its own. Is the assumption that the more difficult is to be preferred. That's got a lot of controversy, not just in those who are not critical text proponents, but those who are. So that it's a pretty interesting discussion there. Where am I going here? Dwayne Green, do you play Minecraft? My kids play Minecraft, and if I want to get their attention, I just load it up on my work computer upstairs and they play it and they just kind of like, right. And that's how I can get their attention. But no, I used to play it back in the day. I made a 4-bit computer out of redstone. If that's the kind of nerd I am. But no, I haven't played Minecraft in ages. No, video games these days, just generally, I don't have a whole lot of time for. All right. Oh, there's a lot here. Oh, that's what's going on. It's loading comments and then it's skipping. So that's what's going on here. I'm going to have to find a better way to get comments sorted out here. 'Cause this is difficult. Hang on. Let me Let me switch my view. There we go. All right. I never condemn anyone who reads other translations. No, I like Pastor Brett. He's a King James Version guy, but I like him anyway. No. It's actually surprising when you take a moment and sit down and listen to what a King James Version onlyist is saying. If you can get past, right, some of your preconceived notions and a couple other things, I think there's some pretty interesting conversations that can be had. I have a couple King James only guys that I'd like to listen to, and there's a lot of really decent information on there. Again, if you can get past the conclusion, right? Again, I'm not a King James Version onlyist, but a lot of the material is pretty good. So Brian Ross, I talked about his book Verbatim Identicality. Again, I don't necessarily agree with the conclusion, but it's a really interesting attempt at grabbing all the differences in the King James Version history, and try and come to terms with those. It's really good, and I think it's an application I think can go beyond the King James Version tradition, but something I've been thinking about since Brian's been talking about that. And of course, I got a lot of details and stuff from Nick's page, Revolution. His Texas Receptus page has a lot of really good information on it. Again, if you can, all you have to do, okay, is learn that you can disagree with a conclusion and see some of the decent work that's being done. Okay, and that's kind of where I'm coming from. So I try to avoid all of the the drama that sometimes goes around with some of the discussion in the King James Bible. I trust the KJV to be the most reliable text. Join the Discord server. We have a Discord server. Don't remind me to share that. Actually, I don't have that on the studio computer. I'm trying to get my computer stuff sorted out. All right, Colin. Either viewpoint can lead to unnecessary conspiracy theories. I don't buy into the heretical corruptors idea, but I also don't buy into orthodox corruption for polemic purposes. Rather, my inclination is to assume that the more orthodox readings reflect how the texts were mildly expanded or paraphrased in worship contexts where no ill will was intended. Yes. So this is a revised Geneva Bible that follows the Byzantine text tradition. Pastor Brett, I agree, and I also don't condemn those who read other texts in addition to the KJV. I also have the NKJV, the NASB 95, the HCSB, the CSB. Most are study Bibles. Colin, I'm not pushing conspiracies. I'm just raising an objection to saying that since a doctrine isn't totally lost, it isn't a problem. Yeah. I might have to skip a few because there's a lot. Man, you guys are talking a lot. I'm just going to start picking some random ones because I'm never going to get through this. I think I'm going to have to come up with a better way to interact with the comments. All right. Scott, the Berean Study Bible is great if you like the critical text. If you prefer a Byzantine or Greek majority position on the New Testament, the majority standard, yes. So the Bible Hub is working on finalizing some work with the majority text, which is interesting. So that's good, I think. Mr. Moreno, NASB already. Pastor Brett, the Majority Standard Bible includes 1 John 5:7 in brackets, unlike the NASB. That's one example of difference. Good. All right, I already talked about Minecraft. Majority Standard Bible hasn't gone to print. No. While we're on the topic of print, just a quick update for the Byzantine text form. So this is the text we've been working on for the last 2.5 years. Feels like forever. So we're actually taking a break for the summer. Everybody just got really busy. There's some personal issues and some other stuff going on as well. So we're going to resume work on that in September. And so we are looking at now, not becoming RP 2024, but we'll be looking at it becoming RP 2025, likely. So apologies. I know everybody is waiting for it. We are working. Right now we're having a break. Okay, we're having a break. And then we will hopefully have that ready in the early part of 2025. We're a little reluctant to put times and dates on that now, obviously, because we've been burned by putting the RP 2024 on there, and we've learned our lesson. So we're still working on it. It's still a thing. It's still happening. It's just delayed. And If you are in the software development world, you know that software always gets delayed. That's the way it is. And since we rely heavily on software and other things and volunteers, right? We're all volunteers. That's the big thing. Nobody's paid to do this, right? So all the stuff that enables us to eat food and to pay our mortgages and pay our rent, that stuff takes priority. So with that being said, it's still on the docket. We're still working on it. It's still going to get done. It's just delayed. So heads up to those who are waiting for the RP edition. All right. Let me just pop down here. Scott VM and Dwayne forgot to share his screen again. Did I? I did too. That's probably a little ways back. Okay. Mr. Moreno says the KJV is missing some material from Acts. If you compare it to the Vulgate, the NIV leaves out all of Acts 15:34, but the KJV still leaves out half of it. Yeah, I came across a reading in the King James Version that was actually shorter than the one in the critical text. I should have noted it. I just remember thinking, oh, well, that's weird. And I didn't even note it. I should have noted it because it was really interesting. I actually have a longer reading in the TTT than the KJV has in the Acts. Okay, which Vulgate? All right, where am I going here? I'm just sifting through the comments here. Pastor Brett, I'm feeling a bit geeky this evening. Go, Dwayne, go. There you go. Ross is a legend. Yes. I consider myself monolingual, but if you pressed me, I have working proficiency in Japanese and Spanish. Nice. And many of us went through a stage where we wanted to learn some Japanese. I don't know what it is about that. Even in high school, a friend of mine and I, we decided that we were going to learn some Japanese, and we got to some of the particles they use, and there's no English equivalent. Totally threw me off, and I was just like, eh. We got as far as like "O Genki desu ka" and "Kanashi desu." That's about as far as our Japanese went. Okay. Deep grammatical dive with Dr. Wallace. Thanks for your hard work. Thanks, Ross. We're almost done with the comments, and then we'll get back to it. KJV Bible preaching on another Sunday morning. KJV Bible preaching in my fundamentalist Baptist church. Sing this song. Nice. Friendly neighborhood Jesus freak. The first 90% of a project takes 90% of the time. Then the rest takes 90% of the time. It's true. It's true. It's the fine details, right? All right. Now I have to remember where it was. Right. We were going to talk about context. So this is what I think probably turned the tide in the discussion for the King James Version translators. Again, just to kind of recap those four general items that we got from Dr. Wallace in his book. This is the what was the title of that book? Go Beyond the Basics, Syntax of Greek, New Testament Greek, something like that. So he had four ways of determining whether the naked dative could be used in a way to state agency. One was lexical, that the dative must be personal. Two was contextual, the person must be portrayed as exercising volition. Three, grammatical, the only clear text involves a perfect passive verb as in the classical idiom. And then linguistic, the agent of a passive verb can become the subject of an active verb. Okay, so we noted that of the four of these, three of them, we meet the criteria in Matthew 5, 21, 27, and 33. So we meet the criteria for three of them. And then the last one, we kind of sort of meet it. We kind of don't, we kind of do, because it's based on a probability and it's not based on a what do you call it? What's the opposite of probability? Certainty. It's not based on a certainty. So the question is always left open to that one little bit of probability. In this case, okay, we probably meet that, but now we're going to come to the discussion of context, and the context of this verse is, again, what I think, for me, seems to suggest that we should use agency here, I would think. I think this is where the King James translators are, and again, I'm not a King James Version onlyist, but when you look at what Jesus is doing in this passage, and again, this is that internal stuff that we're talking about now, right? Internal evidence can be swayed one way or another, but I think that we're talking about agency here, that it's by them of old time, and so if you take a look at the passage, let me get my notes here. I just want to explain this properly. the context. I didn't put it out there. Yeah. So what Jesus is doing in this passage, I'm just going to pull it out at, let's do Blue Letter Bible. Matthew 5. Let's do. I just preached through this little bit here. So to give some contextual details of what's happening here, we're in the Sermon on the Mount. So Jesus is preaching a sermon to those who are listening to him. Obviously, they're listening to him, and he just gets finished preaching the Beatitudes, right? Because he just started his sermon. And in Matthew 5:16, he says, "In the same way, let your light so shine before others," right? It's light and salt. And then he comes to this passage, and again, this is a prevalent passage in the discussion surrounding preservation, but I'm going to ignore that for now. But in Matthew 5:17, Jesus says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." So Jesus is making a very pointed statement here. And this statement here is that I'm not destroying the law. I'm not doing away with it. I'm not doing away with it. Like, the law is still the law. This is what Jesus is saying. Putting aside the conversation of whether or not we follow the law or not, obviously we live by grace and that kind of stuff. But Jesus is stating here that he's not doing away with the law. Why? Because chances are in his ministry, the scribes and the Pharisees likely came to him and accused him of being antinomian, accused him of replacing the law of Moses and replacing that with something else and totally doing away with it. So he's saying to everybody who's listening to him, listen, I'm not doing this. And then he says, "For truly I say, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota nor a dot." You know what? This is ESV. I'm going to move it to King James just because that's what we're talking about. Let me refresh that. "For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not..." I thought I loaded here. There we go. 16. "For verily I say unto you," there we go, "till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled." And he says, whoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. So now, an important distinction that we're looking at here is Jesus is talking about two groups of people. One are those who do the commands, and the other are those who teach the commands. And the complaint here specifically that he's stating is essentially that sometimes those who are teaching the commands aren't really doing the commands, and they're going to be seen as least in the kingdom of heaven. But you're seeing this dichotomy already at the start between those who do the commands and those who teach the commands, right? When we talk about our passage in Matthew 5:31, the distinction is between those who teach the command, right? When we say, it has been said by those of old, right? They're teaching, or those who do the commands to those of old. Okay, that's a very important distinction. And then he says, "For I say unto you," right? "For I say unto you," he's saying, I'm not these teachers. I'm not the scribes and Pharisees. They're going to tell you one thing, right? Whether they do what they say or not, who cares? But I'm saying to you, this is what Jesus. In fact, if you go into the Greek, I'm willing to bet that I is emphatic. "For I say unto you that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven." So now he's got the scribes and the Pharisees in a place where they are not entering into the kingdom of heaven. These are the teachers. Remember, these are the teachers. So we come down, and this is the first place where he says, "Ye have heard that it was said by them of old time. So, thou shalt not kill, and whosoever shall kill shall be in danger of the judgment." But then Jesus says this. He juxtaposes that with, "But I say unto you." But I say unto you. So when Jesus is talking in Matthew 5:21, I think he has the focus on the false teachers, or on the teachers who are teaching but not doing, right? "You have heard that it was said by them of old time," those who taught you before. Those who were teaching you in much the same way that the Pharisees are teaching you today. Okay, they say do this. But then he says, but it's not them anymore. It's me. I'm teaching you. See, the juxtaposition between those who are teaching the law before and Jesus expounding on the law now is lost if we use to them, right? that juxtaposition doesn't come out as strong and is in full force. And I think what we see here when we're looking at this passage is that Jesus is really placing himself in, not opposition, but he's placing himself in a much better way or in a much better place to exposit on the law than those who have exposited before. So the focus is on those of old who were teaching the law, not those of old who were hearing the law. Okay, so that's what I think is happening here. That's my way of looking at this. The reading by them of old tends to make more sense with what Jesus is reinforcing in these passages, that he is now the supreme exegete of the law, and he's going to exegete this in a way that gives you the intent of the law, which in this case, right, whoever is angry with his brother, right, don't be angry with your brother. It's the same as murder, right? You go down a little bit further. You know, those who have, you've heard that it was said by them of old time, thou shalt not commit adultery. And then Jesus exegetes that further and says, well, don't even have lust in your heart. Don't look at a woman to lust after her, right? And you go down a little bit further. In 31, it's been said, whosoever shall put his wife away, let him give her a writing of divorcement. Or in 33, again, you've heard that it has been said by them of old time, thou shalt not forswear thyself, but shalt perform unto the Lord thine oath. But I say to you, don't swear at all, right? So he's taking the teaching, the exposition of those who went before, and he's comparing it with his own exposition. And he's saying, okay, they said this, but now I'm going to elevate your living. So, or elevate what it is you need to do. So juxtaposition should now enter our lexicon. Yes, I like that word. I remember hearing that in like grade 5 or something. It's been in my vocabulary since. It's one of those words. Anyway, so when we look at the context and we take a look at Dan Wallace's 4 grammatical arguments, I'm sure there's other grammars that have ideas in there. And I know, again, they don't necessarily fit that one item perfectly, but it can, right? And you take a look at how Jesus is using this phrase in this passage. I would lean on the side that this is probably going to be, or that we probably should use what the King James Version has put here. Now, again, I'm going to reiterate this point, and it's this, is that the construction, the grammar by itself is ambiguous. It just is. That's how language works. And I think, again, the translators probably used the context to determine that this would be the case, right? There would have been obviously some deliberation. It went back and forth. Again, we take a look at the evidence of what we saw on Bode 1602, and how they had written down notes to suggest that originally it was going to be the opposite way around, but they did. The other thing to kind of take into effect, or the other thing to kind of take into account, is when, am I showing I am not. Look at that. All right. The other thing to kind of take into account is when you have, let me see if I got it here. Did that change? Chapter 5. Okay. Where is it? 20. There it is. The other thing to take into account is when you have a footnote in the King James Version, okay, what that I believe says, and Tim said that, again, in my comments, and I'm using Tim because he said I could use his comments in the video, suggested that when a marginal note occurs because of a translation in the margin, right, it's because there's a likelihood that either or could be the proper rendering. So in the mind of the translators, they weren't entirely certain. They don't have that kind of certainty that we look for in which translation should go there. There's sort of like an admission that the translators themselves aren't entirely certain. So they picked what they thought was the best one after some deliberation, some back and forth, and put the reading in the text, but then left the optional. Optional is kind of a bad word to use for optional, I guess. I don't know. But they left the potential other translation in the margin. So I know some King James Version only as positions will be, well, if it's in the body of the text, then that's good enough for me, and we don't care about the margins, and that's fine. Your prerogative. But just that's likely what the King James Version was translating. So with that being said, That's it. For at least for this textual translation issue. We went into the weeds there. We did go a lot into the grammatical weeds. I hope you found it helpful. If you're still in the chat, let me know. Did you find that helpful? Do you think that the King James Version translators putting by them of old time in there was a good choice on their part? Or do you think to them of old time should remain in the scriptures? What do you think? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. Now it's 10:30. We could probably take a quick look. We could take a quick boo, I think, at the other one. Well, at least we can agree that it was said. Yes. I wanted to take a quick look. I think maybe I'll just wait on this one. So I'll just share a little bit. Sure, why not? So 1 Timothy 6:20 in the epistle, he's saying, sorry, I'm getting distracted by the comments. 1 Timothy 6:20, there's a question of whether we should refer to it as science falsely so called or knowledge falsely so called. And so I have an article up here by Will Kinney. He posted on Facebook this article. Now, I saw the meme that he posted, and I responded to the meme. And I didn't see that he had made he attached this large article until after I had responded. So I wanted to take some time and go through this. I might actually wait because it's already 10:30. I feel like I'm going to go along a lot longer. And I got a couple other things to do tonight still. Maybe I'll get on for another live stream later, and we'll talk about 1 Timothy 6:20 because again, it's another interesting discussion surrounding the meaning of words. I think in 1611 English versus the meaning of words today. Mark Ward would call this a false friend, I believe. Now I'm not sure if it's a false friend entirely, because but then again, it could be. Anyway, I want to take a deeper look at this question here of whether or not we should use the science there, whether or not we should use the science, whether or not we should use the word science there. So let me, I think I'm going to wait here. Let's pop over the comments really quickly. We'll finish it up. So Scott VM, I'm not sure what to think other than that both are valid. Yes. It was said by them of old time, to them of old time. Yes. Yes, that's true. Scientia is Latin for knowledge. Yes. Pastor Jonathan, I agree with your assessment as to the translator's choice, but it should be to the ancients or to those of old time. Yes. Daniel Lundy. Hey, Daniel, I didn't see you made it on there. Glad to see you're here. I believe I understand, but I say much better now. That's good. Thanks, brother. Appreciate your work. O Timothy, depositum custodi. It took me a second to realize that was Latin. Colin, the Bible is true. Mystery solved. Yes, it is. The Bible is true. M.A. Moreno, I wouldn't exactly call Gnostics scientists. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, okay, I'm just going to share a little. Okay, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to share a little bit. Just because what I think is happening here with the word science is science in 1611 did not mean the same thing that science means today. So, let's just do it. Let's just do it. I don't have to be up super early tomorrow. And if you don't, you can stay on with me. 1 Timothy 6:20. This is the passage. Again, guys, I'm not a King James Version onlyist. And you're going to see that here because I think that this is one of the places where I think it would be beneficial if the King James Version would be updated. Now, I'm not calling for it to be updated. I'm just saying that it would be beneficial. I would leave the King James Version as it is. But we have a glut. Okay, this is my peer pressure went out. We have a glut of English translations, and I can get on side with the King James Version only guys who are saying we don't need any more English Bible translations. We don't. For me, the last two versions of the English Bible that came out were the English Heritage Version and the Legacy Standard Bible. The Passion Translation, but that doesn't count as a Bible. Okay, let's just be real. It doesn't count. And my initial thoughts surrounding the EHV and the LSB is like, why? Why do we need another one? Okay, if you want the LSB, just use the NASB 95. Okay, it's as far as I know, it's still published. It's still being printed. Okay, the NASB 95. It's good. It's good. As far as critical text translations go. The English Heritage Version, I think it was produced by the Lutherans, I think. And I just like, why? There's so many Bibles available today. We don't need to add any more. Okay, so anyway, that's my rant. Okay, we don't need any more English Bible translation. We have more than enough. The ESV, I understand, is coming out with another update. Okay, they're updating like 50 or 60 words or something like that. Again, like just leave it. Just leave it alone. Okay, unless they're mistakes, just leave them alone. Okay. Anyway, so this is the passage we're talking about here. So 1 Timothy 6:20, O Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust. Avoid profane and vain babblings and oppositions of science, falsely so called. So the question here is, well, what is science? Science falsely so called. All the other English Bible translations. So if I come to the New King James Version, again, this is my favorite version, the New King James Version. It says, O Timothy, guard what was committed to your trust, avoiding the profane and idle babblings and contradictions of what is falsely called knowledge. So the difference between science and knowledge. Now, there was an interesting Facebook, a Facebook post by Will Kinney. I tagged Kinney when I did the live stream. I was hoping he'd come on and we can have a little bit of back and forth in the comments. That'd be fun. But he posted a meme. Let me see if I can find the meme. You know what? Did I save it on the other machine? This is partly why I didn't want to do this tonight, because I don't have everything fully in order here. You know what? Hang on here. You know what? I'll just go get it. I'll go get it right now. If you guys don't mind waiting, I'm gonna go and get it right now. Because then we can at least see what I'm talking about. Oh, he liked it, so he knows that I've invited him out. All right, good. So Will Kinney, are you in the comments? Just type hello if you are. There it is. Okay. Save image. There we go. Oh, I already saved it. That's funny. Where did I put it? Oh, it says it's on the desktop. That's funny. I didn't see it on the desktop. Let's put it in documents. Documents. There we go. Ken Brandplucked Willie greater than Will Brandplucked Kinney. Nice. Okay. Now, again, I have nothing personal against Will Kinney. He has often given good conversation, lots to think about. And, of course, he is always certain to tell me he's always certain to tell me that when we go back and forth, to let people know that I can't point to any Bible and that I'm Bible agnostic and that I don't have any source I can't hold in, and that's fair enough. Okay, we just get past that. It's a formality at this point. If he doesn't say that, then part of me feels like he's probably sick or something, and I get a little concerned for him. But nonetheless, I enjoy going back and forth with Will Kinney. I've watched him on a number of debates. He's pretty cordial and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, so this is the meme. I don't know if, can you see that? Yeah, you can. Okay, good. So this is the meme that he posted. And He says King James Version 1 Timothy 6:20 points out the difference between science and knowledge. And then this meme, which was produced by Chick Publications, so we know it's going to be good, right? Sorry. Okay, funny story. Okay, when I was a new believer, like baby Christian, I mean like not even 3 months saved, we had this Bible study group that would come to the school. They rented out the gymnasium. We would go and learn, Bible stuff. It was really, really great time. Grew in the Lord. And they had these chick tracts, the ones with the comics and stuff. And I remember reading those and just being absolutely enthralled by them. They were like super entertaining and stuff. I don't know about many of them today, but anyway, a funny story about Chick Publications. All right. So the meme goes on to say, knowledge is a collection of facts and or information that can either be true or false. True science is empirical, based on evidence, and follows the scientific method. Now, this is a problem. This is a problem because the scientific method, as far as I understand it, hadn't been fully developed until relatively recently. So when the person who is penning the original New Testament is writing down the word gnosis, which is what's often translated as knowledge. In fact, every other instance, which is pointed out by Will Kenny himself, 28 other instances are translated as knowledge. And it's just this one instance in 1 Timothy 6:20, which is translated as science. So the problem here is that when the biblical writers were writing gnosis, they did not have in mind the scientific method because it just didn't exist. So anyway, it goes on to say science falsely so-called says, and this is where we would be in agreement, right? I shouldn't even say most, but I would be in agreement with these, right? Science falsely so-called says the earth is not a special creation, but a Big Bang accident, right? Well, I don't believe the Big Bang. God said, let there be light, and there was light, right? God created, I believe that. Men descended from monkeys. This is science falsely so-called. Again, I don't believe in evolution. Oil comes from dead dinosaurs. I don't know about that. Pharmaceuticals can heal you. This seems to be getting a little bit conspiratorial. Pharmaceuticals are helpful, right? I took an Advil for a headache the other day. It made me feel better. Okay. Vaccinations confer immunity. This is probably talking about, are we allowed to say that word on YouTube now? Global warming is a fact, right? Okay, so some of these are kind of conspiratorial, right? Some of them aren't. I'm not going to comment on that just because if I'm going to get in trouble, I want to get in trouble for something KJV or textual criticism related, not some of this stuff, at least not on this channel, okay? You want my opinion on some of this, you can follow me on Facebook or something, I don't know. All right. So it goes on to say, with all that being said, much of what is called science is pseudoscience with an agenda. I would agree with that. Much of what is called science today, that's the key, right? Today is pseudoscience with an agenda, a distinction totally hidden by the NKJV. They really like to pound on the NKJV. Again, I like the NKJV. The NKJV reading of knowledge is the same as the NIV, ESV, NASB, and a host of others. What to do with the New King James Version? As with all modern versions, just walk away. Just walk away from your New King James Version. Okay, well, let's not go there. All right, so I had a little exchange, a little back and forth with Will, and I'll just read the exchange because just easier that way. Before I pull the exchange up, let me just read through the comments here. Pastor John Burris, if 1 Timothy 4 is for a future time and 1 Timothy 6 is for a future time, what about chapter 5? Is the entire book now for a future time or just the last 3 chapters? Yeah, good question. Pastor Jonathan Burris, Paul not instructing Timothy on being consistent in doctrine and living. Kinney is being anachronistic. Yes, I would agree. This is the heart of the matter. This is an anachronistic thing that's happening. We are applying a definition of science that we use today as though they were using that same definition, one, when the Apostle Paul wrote it down, and two, when the King James Version translated it. Science did not mean the same thing back then as it does today. If that is true, then he is also injecting it into Paul's letter as he wrote it in Greek. Yes. My friends and I find chick tracts to have some camp value, but they're often quite terrible. Yes. Camp value. I like that. Camp value. All right. It almost reeks of Ruckmanite dual inspirationism. Yeah, I don't know. Is Chick Publications, would you consider them Ruckmanite? I don't really know. Part of me before would have just been like, yeah, they're Ruckmanite, but I'm starting to see that there's distinction in types of King James Version onlyism. For those who are King James Version only, I'd be interested to hear if you think if Chick Publications would fall under the Ruckmanite banner. Fiat Lux, the original Divine Fiat. Nice, all the chicken and the egg. There you go, nice. But for the grace of God that brings salvation has appeared to all men, teaching us that denying ungodliness and worldly lusts, we should live soberly, righteously, godly in present age. Yes. They see it as a gateway drug to the New World Translation. Oh, the NKJV. Yeah, that's too bad. He absolutely falls into double inspiration. Will Kinney does. It sounds like it based on his response. So we'll get into my responses in just a moment. Yeah, Will Kinney says, I believe God has a direct hand in guiding the King James Bible translators to the right texts and the correct translation of those texts into the English language. NKJ or KJV are fine, yes. Scott's laughing. I don't know what you're laughing at, but I'm laughing with you. Problem is that publishers are changing and removing words, sentences, and intent. 2017 forward is a problem with publishers now. Yeah, I don't know why this specific date, but as I've said, I mean, let's stop making English Bible translation. We don't need any more. There's no justification for it. Okay. So Will Kinney. So my response to this meme on Facebook, and keep in mind this was before I realized that he had actually posted a link to his article online. So if you don't know Will Kinney, he's got a really large website with tons and tons of articles. You have to give him props because he has done a lot of work in putting this stuff together and putting his views down for people to understand where he's at and stuff like that. So if you want to understand what a King James Version only is like, Will Kinney thinks and why he thinks that and all these things, go to the Brand Plucked website and you will get all of that information. He did a really good job at doing all that. And I'm trying to see everyone in the best light. Okay, that's what I'm doing here. All right, so my response. Okay, this is my response to Will on his Facebook. He says, I said, I'm willing to bet that the King James translators were not using the term science as it's explained in this meme. According to Webster's dictionary, one of the meanings of science is the state of knowing, knowledge as distinguished from ignorance or misunderstanding. In other words, knowledge is synonymous with this use. So knowledge and science are synonymous with this definition according to Webster's. So to prove the point, the Greek word gnosis is used here in 1 Timothy 6:20 in 5 other places. Now, I did a quick search, didn't realize there are actually 28. But in 28 other places, I'll just read it as they posted, okay? We'll just keep the errors in there for whatever. In 5 other places, the same word is used, but translated as knowledge by the KJV translators. Since the KJV translators didn't hold themselves to a, quote, identity of phrasing, okay, and since the science and knowledge were practically synonymous in 1611, it makes more sense to call this meme junk than to impose a 20th century definition on a 1611 translation. It's ironic because based on the KJV usage here, this meme is science falsely so called. Now, I thought I was being smart there. Okay, I was being a little bit. Anyway, so a little while goes by and Will Kinney responds to this, and his response is telling, actually. So he says, God sees the end from the beginning. His true words endure forever, and he knew perfectly well what would be happening in the last days because so many prophecies tell us so. He says there is a difference between knowledge and science, as I pointed out in the previous post that you apparently did not see. Now you can go and read the post. I don't think we're going to go through that necessarily tonight. I'll put a link in there so you can see it, but essentially he's trying to prove the point that science means something different, and he uses a whole bunch of people, a whole bunch of commentaries that occurred after the King James Version was translated to try to show that. Now, again, I agree with the sentiment behind what the commentators are saying. I just think they're using the term science where they shouldn't be using it. Knowledge would suffice. I'm going to copy and paste the link here just so if you want to go and read that. It's rather lengthy. I did read through it. It's rather lengthy, so it'll take you a bit of time to go through that. But nonetheless, so he continues on. There's a difference between knowledge and science. As I pointed out in a previous post that you apparently did not see, okay, that was the post that I didn't see. If I say Denver is the capital of Wyoming, that is a false knowledge, but it is not science. If I say John F. Kennedy was the third president of the USA, that is false knowledge, but it is not science. But today people refer to the science of evolution and the science of textual criticism, both which I might add are anachronistic. Okay, there was no science of evolution and science of technology, or science of textual criticism back then. And these things are science falsely so called. Get it? Question mark. Okay. Now, I don't think we have to interact so much with the second part, but the first part is more telling. And I think it was Jonathan there was talking about the double inspiration bit. And we can see here, it says, God sees at the end from the beginning. His true words endure forever. This is Will. And he knew perfectly well what would be happening in the last days because so many prophecies tell us so. So what he seems to be suggesting here is that God specifically moved the King James translators to put science in there because God knew that what would happen is later on down the road, come the 1800s, Charles Darwin would release his book, The Origin of Species, and we would begin the discussion surrounding Westcott and Hort and textual criticism, that God saw this, and so he had the King James translators put science instead of knowledge in there. Now, this is really interesting because this kind of argument is really inconsistent. And here's why. There are two instances in the King James Version where the meaning of a word has changed so much that it actually means something totally different than what the word meant. So the two instances is one is the passage which talks about doctrines of demons. And it goes on, where is that actually? I'll pull that up just because. Doctrines of demons. Yeah, there it is. 1 Timothy 4:1. Yeah, let's do Bible Gateway. That works. Excuse me. Dwayne, Westcott, and Hort, what are you doing? No, I don't know if Westcott and Hort were necessarily the greatest thing to happen to textual criticism, but that's a discussion for another day. Let's do, I should probably just make it smaller to make it easier to scroll through. There we go, KJV. Just happened to be the first one. You know what? Can you guys see that? Am I showing the screen? I am. Okay. There it is. All right. So 1 Timothy 4:1. So this is kind of sharing why I think Will Kinney is really inconsistent here. So in 1 Timothy 4:1-3, it says, Now the Spirit speaketh expressly that in the latter time some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils, speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their conscience seared with a hot iron, forbidding to marry, and commanding to abstain from meats, which God hath created to be received with thanksgiving of them which believe and know the truth. Now, it sounds like Will Kinney. I haven't asked him specifically about his eschatology, but I'm guessing that he's premillennial. We would share that. I'm premillennial. I'm pre-wrath as far as rapture timing goes, if anybody cares. I had a discussion with, who was it? Alan Kirshner a little while back on the 666, Mark of the Beast, and a couple other things. But anyway, so with that being said, we agree. I think we would agree on our eschatology. So we would see this as kind of like an eschatological passage, signs of the times, deceiving spirits and that kind of stuff, right? So two of the doctrines from the deceiving spirits, why am I going here? You'll see, is this. One is to forbid to marry, to say, well, you guys shouldn't marry. Okay, that's a deceiving spirit. Marriage is good, right? He who finds a wife finds a good thing, finds favor with the Lord, right? And then the other one here is where I want to draw attention, is that the other doctrine of demon is to commanding to abstain from meats. Now, how this fits is this. God was somehow capable of knowing, right? From Will Kinney's view, I'm putting a theoretical on here. I need to be clear. I'm being theoretical here. I don't actually believe this, but I don't want someone to take this out of context and say I'm saying something I'm not. You take a look at this passage with 1 Timothy 6:20. God was able to somehow understand that he would need the word to be science in 1 Timothy 6:20 because of all the stuff that was going to happen in the latter times, right? With evolution and with textual criticism and all this kind of stuff. So God had the word science in there. But from Will's perspective, God was able to know that, but he didn't have the mind to think that the definition of the word meat would change, and so it's not actually talking about vegetarianism anymore. That God put meat there, even though the definition would change to be food instead of meat. There's another example of this. Again, you go to another end times passage, right? We would see that premillennial. Only he who letteth will let until he is taken out of the way, right? In the King James Version. Let doesn't mean to allow something to happen. Let means to prevent something. So again, if Will Kinney's going to take the position that it's science because God saw what was happening and he had the King James Version translators move to put science in there, well, God knew that with science, but he didn't know that with the word let in that passage. So it's inconsistent. I don't see how that would work. So anyway, I guess that's kind of it. There's a tremendous amount of inconsistency when we go that way. The best way, I think, to understand the King James Version. Now, again, I'm not attacking the King James Version here. I don't think there's a problem with the King James Version using science there. I mean, we can make an argument that, well, they should have used knowledge because they translated gnosis as knowledge everywhere else. But even in the preface of the King James Version, it says that they didn't hold themselves to an identity of phrasing. They didn't feel it was necessary to translate the same word the same way every time, right? They wanted a bit of variety in some of the words that they picked, so they picked some synonymous words. And I think it's fairly clear that science was synonymous with knowledge in 1611. And the King James Version's translators just used science there. And we don't need to impose any other meaning on the term than what would have been imposed initially at its translation time. So again, for a modern translation to update that as knowledge, I wouldn't see that particularly as an issue. I think the King James Version would be benefited from having knowledge instead of science there, because science is not modern. The modern definition of science is not what was intended by those who wrote it down, nor was it intended by those who translated it. So for us to say that, well, God looked forward and he just made the translators through providence put science on there, is inconsistent, because he didn't use his providence to foreknow that meat didn't mean meat, but just food generally, or that let didn't mean to allow something, but to hinder something. So anyway, that's where I went with 1 Timothy 6:20. I don't usually go out and talk about these things, especially with specific people involved. But I would be open to hearing what Will has to say there. And I would even invite him on to come and talk about it. Why not? That would be a fun conversation. I liked watching him interact with others. I think he would interact as well with me. So let's go to the comments and see what's happening here. David. Problem is that publisher... Okay, we did that one. Get a Bible prior to 2017. Okay, so Colin says, in the Greek, is it knowledge or the knowledge? The ASV says the knowledge, and I'm curious. We could do a quick search there. Do I have my... I don't have... I usually have one here. I would have to grab one to see if there's textual variants too. Let's just check the Textus Receptus. Scrivener TR online. Tis pseudemoni. Oh yeah, so it's the pseudonymous knowledge. Yeah. The article is there. Too many pastors are pushing the KJV and then going after congregants who don't sing like they want them to. I've not experienced that, with the exception of when I was younger in the faith. I went to a fundamentalist Baptist church, learned a lot, got a great love for the Word of God there. I don't have anything bad to say about it, but yeah, they would push the King James Version. I actually had a New King James Version. I took it all the time, and they would always chide me for not having a real Bible. I remember that. Friendly Neighborhood Freak, this meme is probably more Riplingerite than Ruckmanite. Yeah, I don't know if I would see a difference between the two. Riplinger and Ruckman. And that brand of King James Version onlyism, I refer to it as Riplinger Ruckman. I think it's important to make the distinction between King James Version onlyists, because not all King James Version onlyists are Ruckman and Riplinger, right? And they're a little bit more reasonable and will reason better than just to say it's magic God did it. I know I'm totally paraphrasing, and Ruckman would never say that, but all right, Mr. Moreno, but you could argue that the ASV is over-translating the Greek. Could be. Yeah, the word the in Greek does not work the same as the word the in English. The ASV is infamous for that, yes. Only he who letteth shall let until he is taken out of the way. Mr. Moreno, Westcott and Hort weren't the best thing to happen to textual criticism since sliced bread. Of course, that's because they predate sliced bread. That's funny. Yeah, Westcott and Hort, I think they put textual criticism back about 100 years. That's my opinion. I could expand on that further. That would be maybe for another time. Friendly Neighborhood Jesus Freak, problem with the assertion is that where is the full Bible in 1603? Yes, Mr. Moreno, FNJF. Nice. It took me a while to realize what you're saying there. I've seen some King James Version only as attempt to say that the KJV agrees with the old Waldensian Bible, and since the one true church came through the Waldensian and Anabaptists to the Landmark Baptists. I've not heard that claim. I've not heard that. All right. Oh, the Baudio conspiracy. All right. And then lastly, Helga, you made it. How's it going, Mr. Helga? We're actually just about to wrap up. So science is still synonymous with knowledge. Yes, it is. Science is synonymous with knowledge. Today, still, I didn't see that. No, I wouldn't say that. Not today. Especially now with the scientific method. Science is more of like an action, whereas knowledge is more of a thing, right? So you do science, you don't do knowledge. Anyway, all right. I think that's going to be it for tonight. Thank you all for coming on. This was a particularly active one. Glad to see everybody in the comments. Again, thanks Ross for the $10 jump there. Well, while we're here, I'm just going to go ahead and plug our Discord server. So we have a Discord server. Maybe I can log on to it online here. I'm not going to log on while everybody's looking. I'll bring it over here. There we go. Discord.com. There we go. All right. Oh, no, that's okay. No, I can't show it just yet. We have a Discord server. Maybe if one of the gents who are on there, I think Friendly Neighborhood Jesus Freak, you are on the Discord server. I'm willing to bet because you're always on there. Why don't you go ahead and grab the invite link if you can? If you could post that in the chat for me, that would be great. Please do so. The other thing that's happening here is I do have a, let me see if I can find it here. Nah, that's okay. I'll talk about that later. I do have a site, Dwayne Green at Buy Me a Coffee. So if you like what you see and want to throw a few dollars in, some people have been asking recently. So you can do that there. And that's all I'm really going to say about that. I appreciate those who have given. I've been receiving some ad revenue, which is nice because I've been able to update some of my equipment. I'll potentially be taking a trip to Washington in the next little bit, depending on a few things. So just if you happen to be in the area when I'm there, let's meet up for coffee. So I'll keep you updated with those details. And I think that is really about it. That's all. So I'm going to be doing a video shortly with Disciple Dojo. He had a conversation recently about the Catholic spirit. And I don't mean Catholic like Big C Catholic, but the Catholic spirit as in like the whole church, the universal church. And it was about unity in the body. And I saw his discussion about John Wesley and that. And it just spoke to me specifically, especially when it relates to issues with textual criticism. How can we have the Catholic spirit even though we may be of differing textual persuasions. I wanted to bring him on the channel and talk about that, so he's going to come. So hopefully we'll be recording Friday if everything works out. And then a couple other things that we're going to be exploring is the whole discussion surrounding text types and whether or not text types are still a thing. There was a recent conference. Pastor Jonathan Burris, I think you went to that conference. I can't remember whether it was you or someone else I was keeping tabs on. And just a discussion ensuing about how text types are kind of a thing of the past, and with CBGM moving forward, that text types are sort of taking a backseat to some other stuff. I wanted to get somebody on to come and discuss that a little bit to kind of give us some clarity. It's interesting to me as a Byzantine priorist. I kind of go, see, we told you, because I think the general consensus is that there's no text types, at least not in the classical sense. But they still retain the Byzantine text type because it's cohesive and big. Anyway, so keep an eye on that. And of course, we still will be going through the remainder of those 16 passages that are in the King James Version, but not in the critical text, and kind of see where they line up with the Byzantine text. So that's about it. Pastor Jonathan says, I didn't go, but I was talking about it. Awesome. Yeah, keep tabs out, because we're going to have someone on. I'm going to have someone on. We're going to talk about that, because I really want to know what's going on. All right. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for coming on the channel, joining me for this live stream. It was 2 hours long. I think it's probably one of my longest ones. Thank you to everybody who showed up. And until next time, brothers and sisters, we'll see you around.